Geoff Mosher has covered the Birds for about 15 years from multiple outlets, and he continues to do so. He'll tell you more about where you can find his work. And he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Eagles, Buccaneers, week number 2. Mosher's in the house. Geoff, what's happening, man?
What's up, Mike? How are you doing? Thank you for dating me by saying how long I've been covering the Eagles for now.
I know.
I started when I was 15, though, so I'm really only about 29, 30 years old, right?
Hey, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. You've been around this team for a while. We talked about it. Last night we were talking about, Ryan and I were talking about how success sometimes is boring. I mean, there's not a lot of conflict with this team. Everything's very good. I mean, and that's not a bad thing. That's a great thing. But sometimes when you're talking for 4 hours, it's kind of difficult to pontificate and debate when everything's going so well. Is everything going as well? Is it as peachy up there as it appears from the outside?
I think the players are fairly focused. They don't like talking about the Super Bowl anymore. I mean, we've talked about that, the removal of the championship sign in the locker room. Things are good. I honestly think that this year, and this start, by the way, is like kind of a test for the Eagle fan now that the Eagles have won a Super Bowl, because the reactions to some things that us as reporters put out are so different now because the mindset has changed. I'll give you an example. About half hour ago, I tweeted out that Darren Sproles is out for this game. He has a hamstring issue from practice, and I noted that the Saints really got 9 catches and 112 yards out of Alvin Kamara against this Bucs defense that they're going to play, and that not having Darren Sproles, obviously hurts the Eagles a little bit because he's a guy who can catch passes out of the backfield and do some things that Kamara does, right? And it's like RIP to my Twitter timeline, like I'm disrespecting Corey Clement, and oh my God, how can the Eagles won a Super Bowl without Darren Sproles? So how dare I even say that the Eagles will miss Darren Sproles in the passing game? I'm not diminishing the Eagles' chances. I'm not saying anything disparaging about Corey Clement. I'm merely saying that the Eagles would like to have Darren Sproles in the passing game on Sunday, and they won't have him. So it's just a really interesting dichotomy now between how Eagles fans react to certain news now that they're Super Bowl champions compared to beforehand.
Right. Yeah, I know. And we brought this up yesterday, and that was exactly what we talked about. Kamara had a big game against them, and do the Eagles have that type of player on their current roster, that they can utilize in a similar fashion on Sunday?
Well, I think, Corey Clement can be used as a pass catcher. Everybody knows that he had 100 receiving yards in the Super Bowl and caught the wheel route really nicely. I don't think he's the exact same player as Darren Sproles and nor Alvin Kamara, in that the ability to kind of line up in the slot and maybe run a two-way out, against a defensive back, and as crisp of a route runner as Sproles has been in the past. But still, he's a guy who's shown that he can be a mismatch in the passing game on, throws to the flat, wheel routes, and things like that. So I would expect that you'll see a little more of him this week, especially, with Sproles out, and a little more than you saw last week against Atlanta.
Yeah, I know some of the top areas that we've been kind of focusing on. Let me see if you feel the same way. Is the Eagles' defensive line against the Bucs' offensive line, that front seven included. I mean, Jim Schwartz up against Dirk Koetter in this matchup. Do you think the Eagles have the depth and the personnel to really change the looks that Fitzpatrick got last week? Because he got a ton of them.
Yeah, I'll tell you, 2 things really stood out to me about watching the Tampa Bay offense against the Saints on tape. And one is that the Buccaneers offensive line protected Fitzpatrick really well, and that surprised me against the Saints defensive front that was very good last year. I don't know if anything's changed. They've added a little bit. They used their first-round pick on a pass rusher. I thought they would be pretty good, but there were times that the Saints were dialing up blitzes and just not hitting home, leaving Fitzpatrick to have enough time to get the ball to his weapons, and he's got weapons. Now, I know Desean Jackson might not play, but one thing that really stood out to me was Chris Godwin, O.J. Howard, and, of course, Mike Evans. They made a lot of contested catches. I got to say, the Saints secondary got shredded, but there were a lot of plays where the coverage was there, but the Buccaneers receivers just did a better job fighting off the coverage to get to the ball, and that surprised me. I think the Eagles secondary is up for a challenge here. I mean, Malcolm Jenkins will probably be in the slot a lot on Howard, and of course, Jalen Mills or Ronald Darby against Mike Evans is going to either be a give up in size or a give up in speed, depending on where they put Mike Evans, on what side of the field. So, but either way, the team is just going to have to play a very tough physical game.
You mentioned the Eagles secondary. I want to ask you more about that matchup with Mike Evans. Who do you think is the best matchup for the Eagles against Evans in the secondary? Is it Mills? Is it Jones? Or is it just going to be a group effort?
And I'm not trying to be dismissive of the question, but I just don't think that they have a good matchup in general against Evans. And that's okay because you know what? They didn't have a great matchup on Thursday night, Ryan, against Julio Jones, right? He had 165 yards, I think, or something like that. But the Eagles still won the game, and the Falcons really didn't score a lot of points. I mean, you put Mike Evans up against Jalen Mills, and Mike Evans can put a double move on for a guy who's 6'5" and 230 pounds. He is a freak of nature for his ability to run routes and run by people. He burned Marshawn Lattimore, who's a very good quarterback, for a touchdown, and he put a nice move on him. So you put him against Jalen Mills, who's not in the Marshawn Lattimore stratosphere, and you're just going to give up yards. And if you put him against Darby, who could probably match Evans' speed for speed, you're giving up 5 or 6 inches. And one thing I saw last week is that Fitzpatrick had the back shoulder throw to Evans working really well. So, again, neither individual matchup is real good, but it doesn't have to necessarily be a great one as long as they take care of getting to Fitzpatrick on with pressure or stopping other guys like Godwin and Howard from erupting too.
What do you expect from Zach Ertz this Sunday? Week 1, he really struggled against the Falcons. I mean, more drops than we expect from him. What will the Eagles do to really get him going and take advantage of that Bucs secondary? I think the big thing is that because the Bucs won't have Hargraves, right, and they won't have Frank Grimes probably, they'll be without their 2. And that has a trickle-down impact because now you got a rookie starting at one cornerback spot, a third-year guy who's normally a nickel back starting on the other outside spot, and now all your sub-packages, right, your nickel corner is now your 4th cornerback instead of your 3rd, and vice versa. You may have to play your safeties in a little bit more of a hybrid role. And so what I think the Eagles really need to do is get the running game going early with Ajayi, and then start to run an up-tempo offense and run your RPOs. And when you do that and you move the ball, you run up-tempo, you limit Tampa Bay's ability to substitute and get different, fresher legs on the field. And you just then, once you start to do that, you just start going after those cornerbacks who are probably, A, going to be tired in that hot, humid weather, and B, who aren't very talented to begin with. And then you'll find that's when I think you'll be able to get Mike Wallace and Nelson Aguilar going where you couldn't do it as much against the Falcons, who have a superb secondary.
How about those guys, Jeff? I mean, Alshon Jeffrey, I wouldn't say he had a jump-off-the-page year last year. He was good. He wasn't great. But Nelson Aguilar, Mike Wallace, I mean, are they guys that are going to scare other teams? Now, Hargraves is out, Grimes is out. This might be a team that might have their hands full, but Nelson did a lot of good work in the slot last year. He didn't do it on the outside. So is that an area of concern for the Eagles until Jeffrey gets back?
One thing I wrote earlier this week, Mike, was that I thought even though the overall receiving numbers pretty much for everybody were down, that Nelson had 8 catches. I think 5 or 6 of them came when he was lined up as an outside receiver. And he's facing Desmond Trufant. He's facing Alford, the other guy on the other end, who's also a very good corner. And that's, again, it's a really good Falcons defense. And there were a couple of catches Aguilar made where he created the separation using his body, jumping up. I mean, they weren't 15, 20, 50-yard catches, but he moved the chains with some really significant catches at times. So I thought he actually played fairly well. We know that the passing game was sputtering against a really good Falcons defense and full struggle. So I'm not really concerned about Nelson lining up on the outside and not being able to beat a couple of backup cornerbacks from the Bucs. And remember, Nelson's from Tampa, so I'm sure he's kind of fired up to have a big game there anyway. And on Mike Wallace's side, I saw about 4 or 5 times where he was dead wide open, or he ran a great route and the ball just didn't get to him. So it was kind of symptomatic of the night Nick Foles
was having. So after one game, I'm not down on either of those guys, and I think that this weekend is a really inviting opportunity for them to show up. I know, not to channel my inner Gabe Kapler here, but Mike Wallace, according to the Next Gen stats, ran 2 of the fastest routes in the NFL last week. So I don't think he's lost anything or that he's can't play anymore. I just think that the Falcons defense is really, really good, and Nick Foles was very, very careful in where he was going with the football.
Yeah, we're talking with Geoff Mosher here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. You hear him Thursday nights on Mosher, McMullen, and Krause. That show live from what seemed like a raucous Landmark Americana last night. Good crowd for the Eagles and the Bucs, and it sounds like the Eagles are going to have pretty good representation down there. But I'll tell you what, the Buccaneers, after the way they played in the first week against New Orleans on the road, I would imagine they're going to have a lot more excitement in that building than they typically would, if a team's coming in 0-1 and putting up 48 points. So my question really is, do we look at this Tampa offense as an explosive offense? Do you look at them and say, yes, they are maybe not 48 points a week, but at home in September, early on in the season, do you look at this team as an explosive offense?
All right, so yes, they were explosive last week. Yes, I do think, and they were one of my kind of like surprise teams to watch going into this year. I thought they made a lot of really nice offseason additions, and I thought they were going to be much more competitive. I don't think they're going to average 40 points a game, obviously. And if you look at the history of Ryan Fitzpatrick's career, he has never, ever had back-to-back 300-yard games or efforts of 300 yards or more. In fact, his record after a 300-yard game is 5-7, and I think 8 out of those 12 games, he's thrown for less than 250 yards. And so I kind of think that while I like their weaponry around Ryan Fitzpatrick, I have a hard time believing that Tampa's going to come home against this Eagles defense and Ryan Fitzpatrick's going to just completely light him up again, and after 2 weeks be, one of those guys that we're talking about is, holy cow, this is the next great quarterback at 14 years into his career. So I think he's going to be coming back to earth here on Sunday. But that being said, he does have good weapons, and he may not have to have a 400-yard, 4-touchdown game to put some points on the board.
Yeah, and I know that this Eagles defense has a lot more pressure than the Saints, although the Saints defense was pretty good last year, which was a surprise. I'm not suggesting
Very much so.
You're right. I'm not suggesting that their whole season was a surprise, but I don't know what to think about what we saw in that game. But what do we think about the Buccaneers defense? We know they're going to be banged up in the secondary, but they added Curry, McCoy. They got Bo Allen, who's not much of a pass rush guy. But what do we think of this Bucs defense, who gave up 40 last week?
Yeah, they did. And it's funny because it was obviously mostly through the air, and obviously they're playing a team that has Drew Brees and Mike Thomas and Alvin Kamara, tough passing mismatch, and Ted Ginn has a lot of speed, and that's what they're in a fast track at the Superdome, so it's not really surprising. But I did notice that the Saints didn't run a lot, but when they did, there were not a lot of space to run. I think they averaged about 3.3 yards per carry. Gerald McCoy is a very good defensive tackle, and now he's surrounded by Bo Allen. He's surrounded by Vinny Curry, two guys who were really significant to the Eagles' run defense last year, which was an excellent run defense. So, I'm sitting here telling you I think the Eagles need to run the ball better, and then that will get them to execute their RPOs and get them in hurry-up offense a little bit more and up-tempo offense. But obviously they have to run the ball better. I think they can. I think they can run the ball better than the Saints did. Obviously, you're now playing outdoors, and you've got Jay Ajayi probably a little bit more healthier and ready to go. But that will be the key. I mean, I think the Bucs defense is good, but, we're talking about the Eagles with a top 3 offensive line and a really good running back and a very good play caller in Doug Peterson. So I would suspect that he really looks to get the run game going and that they'll be able to do that against the Buccaneers.
Geoff, going off Doug's play calling, how much will the game plan actually change this week in order to slow down that Bucs defensive line, specifically McCoy?
Well, I don't know if it changes all that much other than last week against Atlanta. It seemed like the run game wasn't good, and Doug was kind of content to try to throw it around a little bit to try to open up the run, but they weren't completing a lot of passes. I think with the case of defensive line in Tampa, you'll have Brandon Brooks most often locked up against McCoy, and he's a Pro Bowl right guard himself. And, there were a couple of times against the Falcons where you saw Sayamalu come out as a third tight end. And after a really abysmal effort by Zach Ertz blocking against the Falcons, maybe you'll see Sayamalu in there a little bit more. Now, you become a little bit more predictable when you do that, and you're telling the defense you're probably going to run. But if you're on first down, that's okay. So maybe you'll see a little bit more Sayamalu. Maybe you'll see a little bit more two tight end formations to try to get big up front and see if you can run the ball better.
How much does Sproles being out affect Doug's play calling? Mike and I talked about this before. We talk about it frequently. It feels like sometimes Doug forces some things with Sproles. He's not shy about saying how much he loves Sproles and how much he feels he impacts games. Sometimes when Sproles is out, it seems like the play calling is simplified and more consistent than when he's in the game. Am I crazy with that assessment, or what are your thoughts on Sproles being out and how Doug changes his play calling?
Ryan, it's funny you mentioned that, because I've heard a lot lately exactly what you said, and that Doug Peterson has an affinity for Darren Sproles that doesn't make sense given how well they played without him. And I actually think that this goes back to Chip Kelly. If you remember, Chip Kelly's second year, Sproles was on the Saints. He burns them in the playoffs with the return. Chip Kelly goes out. They bring him in. And there's a game against Jacksonville here in Philly that they're losing, and they're facing 4th and 1. And Chip gives the ball to Sproles, not McCoy, not anybody bigger, and Sproles rips off a touchdown run. I think it was like a 30 or 40-yard touchdown run on that play. And everybody's like, I can't believe Sproles got the ball on 4th and 1, and they ran it with him. And then I can't believe he actually scored a touchdown. Coaches love the guy. He's a weapon you can use in so many ways. Do they become overly dependent on him? Maybe. I kind of think that he got a lot of the carries early against the Falcons because Doug knew that Ajayi wasn't 100% with the foot, and that he wanted to save Ajayi more for the second half, knowing it was going to be a battle. You want to have your best weapon there for the end. I sense, though, that with Sproles out, you will see more Corey Clement, and that might be a good thing because of what Corey Clement can do and what he has shown.
Yeah, and I want to get your take on Desean Jackson being out for them potentially. Now, he did practice today. I guess he was out there. I don't know if he practiced per se, but he was out there. And I heard you talking last night on your show, which was he got knocked out, man. I mean, Jenna Lane was on with us. She said he was out in the locker room, so she was a little surprised that he returned back there. But is Desean Jackson playing or not playing potentially a difference in the outcome of this game, or not really?
No, I think, listen, I mean, come on, we've all watched.
I'm not slating Desean, but I'm just saying, is Tampa Bay that comparable to Philadelphia that a player like that could be the difference in winning and losing?
Well, without Desean on the field, right, if you're Jim Schwartz and you're in your single safety looks, you're going to rotate your safety a little bit more now toward Mike Evans' side and let the other guys try to beat you. And when it's Desean Jackson, though, you rotate your safety toward that side and just hope that your best corner can match up one-on-one with Mike Evans, which is what the Saints really tried to do and just didn't work out for them very well covering either guy. So, Desean has that widespread impact where he makes things easier for everyone else. So I do think losing Desean, I think it impacts what the Bucs will be able to do and how they'll be able to attack certain defenses, and also it influences how Jim will call, one deep safety versus two deep safety coverages. But nobody should be surprised that Desean is back at practice, because it's actually part of the concussion protocol now that you're supposed to go out there and see how you do as in individual drills, getting that heart rate up and seeing how you progress throughout the day. So I wouldn't interpret him being on the field today as a sign that he's definitely playing or that he's progressing really well. What they have to see is how well he responds, tonight and tomorrow morning to elevated physical activity.
All right, Geoff Mosher's with us here on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. We know they're banged up in the secondary. We know Philadelphia is, though, losing some wide receivers. No Alshon Jeffrey, Darren Sproles is out. So where they're weak, the Eagles have a couple of weaknesses. Overall, though, where's that area in this game that you think might be too much for one team to overcome over the other?
Well, like I said, if the Eagles run the ball well and are able to then have play action in their arsenal and RPOs and get that offense functioning fast, I just think Tampa is going to wind up being too depleted in the secondary to be able to match the Eagles' weapons. You know, I just think that, especially if the Eagles can go fast and prevent Tampa from subbing, and you got to keep that personnel on the field, and they're getting tired and they're getting run on, and you know it's hot and humid. I think that will be a major advantage for the Eagles, and I do think that they should be able to run because that's what they normally do well. So that's where I think the Eagles have a decided advantage against the Bucs. And let's also remember that JPP, if he plays, will not be at 100% either. So I mean, they've got a banged up secondary, and they're a little banged up on the line. Their first round pick Vita Vea is not played yet. He's been hurt. He's not going to play Sunday. So again, when you can't bring in fresh legs, you tire out. And I just think the Eagles need to give the Bucs a taste of their own medicine and let the heat and humidity bother them more so than it's going to bother the Eagles.
So it looks like you have an Eagle win.
Yeah, I think the Eagles are going to win 31-21.
31-21. Geoff Mosher here on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. Don't forget, we've got Pick the Perfect Score tonight at 5:30. You tell us your score of the Eagles-Bucs game, and you can win $200 this week. No winner last week with an 18-12 score. All right, Geoff, of course, Thursday night, Mosher, McMullen, and Krause from the Landmark. What else do you got going on? Where else can the people find you?
Yeah, please check out my stuff and subscribe to my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Geoff Mosher. It's only $1.99 a month, which is like 6 cents a day. There's no ads, no pop-ups, no distractions. The stories come straight to your email address as soon as you sign up, so it comes to you every day. And I've been covering the team comprehensively. I do a lot of all-22 breakdown, scouting reports, inside news, everything. And a portion of the money that I make will go to the Wounded Warrior Project. So you're also getting not just great Eagles coverage, but you're donating to a great cause.
All right. Make sure you check out all of those coverage points for Geoff. And, of course, you can hear him Thursday night right here on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Moshe, enjoy the weekend, pal.
All right, Mikey. Thanks.